and welcome to tonight's Historic Preservation Commission meeting. It is nice to see everyone here this evening. I would like to officially call to order tonight's meeting of October 25th, 2023. To get things started, as we always do, if I could ask if we all rise to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We will now introduce ourselves as the members of Tuckahoe's Historic Preservation Commission. I will start. My name is Jenny Steinhagen.
I am Greg Luisi.
Peggy Bellis.
Unfortunately, member Castellanos and member Abrams were unable to attend tonight. I was advised in advance they will be present at the next meeting. The three of us here serve as a quorum to allow for business to proceed, which we will by following the agenda for tonight. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. This is regarding the minutes from our last meeting, which was held in September 28th, 2023. So if the members of the commission have had a chance to review those minutes, and unless there is any objection or questions for discussion, may I ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the September 28th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Thank you, John, for your help with those minutes. Next on the agenda is acknowledgements and awards, and we have been looking forward to this. In Tuckahoe, as the Historic Preservation Commission, we have a number of tasks, and included in them is the recognition of landmark property owners here in Tuckahoe. Tuckahoe has two landmarks. One of them is the Washington Hotel, and the commission has had the opportunity to work with the owner of the Washington Hotel on a number of occasions. He's spoken here at the commission meetings in the past. And we have offered as a commission to assist him with pursuing any grants related to the maintenance, ongoing maintenance of the Washington Hotel, or to move forward with a National Register application, should he be so inclined. But one thing that we can also do is we can recognize and we can thank him, because when I reference the Washington Hotel, no, there's no hotel on Main Street in Tuckahoe. It once served as a living quarters for a significant group of people here in Tuckahoe, which we'll hear a little bit about in a second. But it is one of the most visually recognizable buildings in Tuckahoe on Main Street. You know which one I'm talking about. It's the beautiful marble building that is frozen in time. It looks like you could blink and you would be in the year that is clearly shown at the top of the building, 1883. And we have this visual feature of Tuckahoe. It reminds us of the Tuckahoe marble quarries and of the people who worked in those quarries and the significant impact that those quarries had on our village. And it stands because of the people who have preserved and taken care of it. And there is a long list of people involved in that. And if anyone's interested in seeing the names of those people, I encourage you to check out the application that was submitted for that local landmark for the Washington Hotel. It lists a number of families and businesses that have passed through there that we honor tonight through honoring Dr. Frank Petronella, who is the owner of the Washington Hotel. Dr. Petronella, if I could ask if you would join us up here in the front, we would like to present you with a proclamation for 101 Main Street, also known as the Washington Hotel, in gratitude of the care that you have maintained in this building.
Okay, I'll read from here. The Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission does hereby honor Dr. Frank Petronella for his work in Tuckahoe specifically his impact on maintaining the exterior facade integrity of the Tuckahoe local landmark at 101 Main Street, known as the Washington Hotel, and also as the Samuel Fee Building. Whereas the Washington Hotel was originally built in 1883 for Samuel Fee, a superintendent of the Eastchester Marble Quarry Company, and served as a meeting hall and lodge for the Journeyman Stonecutters Union, which had a presence in Tuckahoe going back to April 1839 as a local community center, and in the late 1800s and afterwards as a social center of Tuckahoe. Whereas the Washington Hotel is directly and intrinsically linked to the cultural, architectural, social, and economic history of the Tuckahoe because of its direct relationship to the local marble quarries and the people who worked in the marble industry and in the quarries for almost a century. Whereas the foundation and facade of the Washington Hotel, which exhibit the original 1883 marble that was extracted from the nearby marble quarries in order to build this three-story structure, embody the distinguishing characteristics associated with this construction and are valuable examples of the use of indigenous materials and craftsmanship. Whereas the Washington Hotel is one of the most distinguishable buildings on Tuckahoe's Main Street, a Westchester County road that appears on maps of the area dating as far back as 1728 and represents an established and familiar visual feature of the community by virtue of its unique location and physical characteristics. Whereas the Washington Hotel was unanimously recommended for designation as a local Tuckahoe landmark by the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission on January 25, 2023, and was approved by the Tuckahoe Board of Trustees as a local landmark on April 10, 2023. Whereas Dr. Frank Petronella is the owner of the building, known as the Washington Hotel, located at 101 Main Street, Tuckahoe, New York, 10707, and has beautifully cared for and maintained the historic fabric of the building since he took ownership in 2007. And now I'll give you the honors of the last paragraph.
Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Jenny Steinhagen, Chair of the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission, on behalf of the members of the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission, Samara Abrams, Peggy Bells, Ladislau Castellanos, and Greg Luisi, and on behalf of the residents of Tuckahoe, extend to Dr. Frank Petronella our sincere appreciation and admiration for all that he has done and continues to do for our Tuckahoe community, and especially for this cherished and valued local Tuckahoe landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So needless to say, I'm a little overwhelmed by all this. When Jenny Steinhagen approached me and also Dick Fogliano about the Preservation Committee and the possibility of making it a historical site, I was pleased to say the least, but just a little background about it. I've been watching this building for 40 years. My aunt used to drive me by it all the time to tell me that my grandfather worked in the quarries and worked in this town, and I would see that building and I admired it because of its unique architecture and how it did stand out. Of course, at that time, Tuckahoe looked a little bit less upscale. There were a lot of industry and things around there, right around where the hotel was. And I didn't realize that at some point I'd have the opportunity to buy the building. And I bought the building in 2006. And I set about trying to, after I saw the inside of it, I was completely overwhelmed. And I set about this. I said, I'm going to bring this building back to where it was because it was in pretty bad shape. So I found the names of through actually the Generoso Pope Foundation, the names of people who would restore and duplicate certain things like the color of mortar and the type of mortar and the type of gutters. The gutters on the building are made out of stone. They're called English gutters. And they were in terrible shape. The building was leaking. And I found people who could restore it. There aren't many. And I've been doing things like that to the building ever since. And just going into the basement of the building and seeing the workmanship on the simple things like the lintels over doorways and the joists in the floor, which are like telephone poles, I was completely wowed by it. And when I bought the building, I just made it sort of like my life's work. I really want to keep it nice and make it better. And I thank you and everyone on the committee here for this, and I appreciate everything that you've brought me through this process. And I don't really have too much else to say. I mean, I could go on because I talk too much, but but thank you very, very much. I'm very, very honored.
Thank you again. Super. Congratulations again, and thank you very much. And there are some videos on the Tuckahoe YouTube channel if you'd like to hear more about the details of that history of the Washington Hotel. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing to consider the Certificate of Hardship application for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House. What I'd like to do is set the stage a bit for tonight's conversation so that we know the parameters of the discussion, and then when we will invite the applicant, the owner and representatives of the Ward House to come up and speak. They will, and we will, be addressing information that is found in the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Legislation landmark. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on specific items in here. So after the applicant has had a chance to speak, this commission would like to ask some questions where we have the need for some additional information or some clarification. Tonight's discussion is a certificate of hardship for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House. It is not a certificate of appropriateness discussion about whether or not the Ward House is falling down and poses an imminent threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding community. That discussion has already taken place. There were a number of meetings that were held, documents were submitted. This commission ruled or decided unanimously that there was not proof to validate the claim that it was falling down. This is not we're not revisiting that tonight. That discussion has taken place. That decision was made. Tonight's discussion is not about whether or not the Ward House is historically, architecturally, socially, culturally, or economically significant to the village of Tuckahoe. Those conversations took place on many meetings, resulting in a unanimous vote from this commission and a unanimous approval by the Tuckahoe Board of Trustees to make the Ward House a landmark. It's a landmark. That's not in question tonight. And as a landmark, it is the guidance, I should say, for how to care for a landmark and treat a landmark is found in the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Legislation. Back to the hardship. There is specific detailed information in the legislation about what constitutes a hardship. So I would like to bring that to all of our attention. It's in section 9 on page 9 of the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Legislation. Hardship criteria for demolition, removal, relocation, or alterations. An applicant whose certificate of appropriateness for a proposed demolition, removal, relocation, or alteration of a landmark, resource, or property has been denied may apply for relief on the grounds of economic hardship. In order to prove the existence of economic hardship, the applicant shall document each of the following. Number 1, the landmark is in a serious state of disrepair, which is not due to the waste or neglect of the property owner. Number 2, the alleged hardship is not self-created. A hardship is self-created when the applicant acquires the property subject to the restrictions from which the applicant seeks relief, which factor alone shall not preclude the approval of a certificate of appropriateness. Number 3, the local landmark and the lot upon which it was situated at the time of designation is incapable of earning a reasonable return as demonstrated by competent financial evidence. Number 4, the landmark cannot be adapted for any other use, whether by the current owner or by a purchaser that could earn a reasonable return. Number 5, the alleged hardship is unique and does not apply to other landmarks. Number 6, that demonstrated efforts to find a purchaser interested in acquiring the property have failed, including any listing of property for sale or rent, price asked, and offers received within the previous 2 years, and testimony and relevant documents regarding any real estate broker or firm engaged to sell or lease the property, reasonableness of price or rent sought by the applicant, or any advertisements placed for the sale or rent of the property. Just 2 more. Number 7, cost estimates for the proposed construction, alteration, demolition, or removal, and an estimate of any additional cost that would be incurred to comply with the requirements for a certificate of appropriateness. And number 8, demonstrated attempts to apply for or be qualified for economic incentives and/or funding available to the applicant through federal, state, city, or private programs. So those 8 points that would qualify for a certificate of hardship, economic hardship, is what tonight's discussion is about. Okay. Okay, so I think now is a good time to invite our applicant to come forward. After they have had a chance to present information and we've had a chance to ask some questions, we will then vote to open it up to public comment and invite anyone and everyone to join the discussion. With that as our plan, can I ask for a... No, sorry, that's later. I'd like to ask the applicant or members of the team to come forward.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Lee Lefkowitz from Zarin and Steinmetz. I represent the applicant, the owner of the property. With me is Greg Holcomb, who's a principal of the applicant, as well as Louis Campana, our architect. If you'll bear with me, I'll just for a moment take you through a little bit of the history of why we're here. The applicant bought this property in August of 2021. It was part of a larger series of properties that he purchased from the now defunct Concordia College, purchasing them sight unseen, as is, where is. The house, before my client purchased it, was allowed by Concordia and the village to be used as a college dorm, during which time it fell into a serious state of disrepair. At that time, when my client purchased it, there was no historic preservation law in Tuckahoe. The village enacted its historic preservation law in January of 2022, and a community group submitted a landmark nomination form for the property in February of 2022. The applicant's goal all along has been to revitalize this property, while also respecting its history and providing a historic structure at this site that honors the landmark while still generating a reasonable return on his investment to which he's entitled. So we apply now to replicate what's there in the most cost-effective way possible. We were previously before your board on a certificate of appropriateness application on the health, safety, welfare issue, which your board denied, which allows us to now come forward and bring this economic hardship application. So tonight we're really going to be focused on the economics, and there are 8 criteria as you indicated. A big part of this is the economics. That's 2 of the criteria actually, and our architect Louis is going to be speaking to that in more detail. And I'm also going to call on Greg Holcomb to speak about his efforts to sell the property, which is another criteria. I'm going to handle each of them in turn briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Louis. The first is that the landmark is in a serious state of disrepair, which is not due to the waste or neglect of the property owner. The conditions of the property are well documented in Pantech Engineering Structural Assessment. We submitted that the last time around. There's some overlap there. There we showed that there are failing girders, bulging and warping throughout the structure, cracked, warped, and unsupported floor joists, cracked and deteriorated attic posts, termite and water damage, crumbling and improperly installed foundation. All of this is documented in the written submissions. I won't go into it exhaustively tonight, but all of this occurred before the applicant purchased the property. None of that even includes the fact that when it was used as a college dorm, Concordia sort of haphazardly, not using best practices, and in frankly sloppy and unsafe fashion, converted it into a dorm, bedrooms, bathrooms, heating, a sprinkler system that was damaged throughout the house. Large penetrations were drilled in structural members for piping without following best practices. These reports of disrepair come from our licensed engineer. No other engineer has refuted this or even opined here. We've got the only engineer who submitted anything here. Number 2, the alleged hardship is not self-created. Once again, the applicant bought this property in August 2021. there was not even a historic preservation law at the time, enacted in January 2022, and the landmarking application was filed a month later. So all of that's nearly 6 months after the owner purchased the property. So it's not a self-created hardship. Number 3, the local landmark is incapable of earning a reasonable return demonstrated by competent financial evidence. Again, Mr. Campana is going to discuss the financial evidence and the financial implications of a rebuild versus a renovation. But for my part, I'll simply note that the property is situated in the residential A5 zoning district, which prohibits commercial uses. All of the uses surrounding the property are one-family dwellings. So in terms of reasonable return, what we're really talking about here is renovating it or rebuilding it and then reselling it. So you'll see our budgetary proposal. Mr. Campana will discuss that. But the property is a single-family home, and in fact, that's his historic use. One of the criteria in the historic preservation law is that the site maintain its historic use. So the question that we're really focused on tonight is how can we make this a single-family home that generates a reasonable return. Number 4, the landmark cannot be adapted for any other use. As I indicated, the zoning for the site prohibits commercial uses. Number 5, the alleged hardship is unique and doesn't apply to other landmarks. So interestingly, this is the only property designated or noted as being historic in the Tuckahoe Comprehensive Plan that is in a residential district. All the others are not in residential districts. In fact, all of the others are either public, commercial, or governmental uses. That includes the Washington Hotel, which is the only other landmarked property. So this site really is unique, even among the properties that Tuckahoe has called out as being somewhat historic, for a number of reasons. The zoning, the use, the fact that it's in private ownership, and another one. SHPO did not issue a determination on eligibility for this property until January of 2022. So it was not even designated by SHPO as being even eligible for a historic designation until after my client purchased the property. That differs from both the Hodgman Rubber Company and the Tuckahoe Railroad Station, which the SHPO commissioner accepted as eligible in December of 2018. So this property is very different from all the others. Number 6, demonstrated efforts to find a purchaser interested in acquiring the property. I'm going to let Mr. Holcomb speak to that a little bit to discuss his efforts. Suffice it to say that there's been no reasonable offers to purchase this property. There's been one interested buyer, which is the community group. Mr. Holcomb will speak to that a little bit. Other than that, no one's been interested. My understanding from Mr. Holcomb is that he listed it months ago. One potential buyer came to look at it, and once they learned of the landmarking, they weren't interested and never made an offer. When we talk about reasonableness of those offers, what we're simply saying is Mr. Holcomb shouldn't be forced to take a loss here, right? So he should be entitled to a reasonable return. And number 7 is cost estimates for the proposed construction, alteration, demolition, or removal. Again, Mr. Campana is going to speak to that. The cost estimates for the rebuild versus the renovation. Suffice it to say, it would cause my client to lose significant money if he were constrained to renovate as opposed to rebuild the property. The only way for him to obtain any kind of a return is a rebuild here. And finally, the last is attempts to apply or be qualified for economic incentives. And the applicant really did take this seriously. He took every step seriously. Here, he went out and retained a professional consultant, AKRF, to analyze the site, as well as available incentive programs to determine are there any incentives out there that he could apply for and obtain that would defray the cost of doing a renovation as opposed to a rebuild. We submitted that report that was generated by AKRF to your board. There are none of the major incentive programs apply here. There were a few minor ones that could apply, and suffice to say, those are not in the dollar numbers that would make a difference here. We're talking about in the 5-figure range or the 4 or 5-figure range in terms, and what we're talking about in terms of the difference in cost between a rebuild or a renovation is in the $400,000 to $800,000 difference. So nothing that's going to make up the difference here that's going to prevent my client from losing money if you were constrained to renovate as opposed to rebuild. So in sum, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Campana now, In sum, we're asking your board to grant this hardship application, permit my client to revitalize this property in a way that both honors the history, replicates what's there, and is cost effective and allows him to generate some kind of a return on this purchase. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Campano, who's going to discuss the economics in a little more detail.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Louis Campana, architect, on behalf of the applicant. We have one more member who showed up, Peter, the structural engineer from Pantech. Based on the Village of Tuckahoe Code and Historic Preservation Standards for Certificate of Appropriateness. Really? Based on the Village of Tuckahoe Code and Historic Preservation Standards for Certificate of Appropriateness, we've analyzed the economics of reconstruction against the economics of restoring the ward house and presented to the Commission bona fide proposals for each method. The first method, which we strongly believe will yield a reasonable return, is reconstruction. The proposal provided by Adirondack Fisheries Incorporated reflects the total cost of reconstructing the ward house with new materials as it was presented to the public and this Commission at the last public hearing. Our initiative is to reconstruct the ward house using new materials and modern building practices that will respect the existing house in scale, location, proportion, and color, along with preserving many site features that currently exist. The new structure will also uphold the integrity, property value, and character of the surrounding neighborhood. The reconstructed ward house will be energy efficient and have low life cycle costs for the end user. The method of reconstruction is a cost-effective and time-efficient approach which will reduce carrying costs despite the 2 years of carrying costs my client has already incurred. The cost for reconstruction, as quoted by Adirondack Fisheries, is $882,775. Following the method of reconstruction are the costs associated with restoration. Looking at the ward house today, we can all agree that the siding is vinyl or aluminum, there are asphalt roofing shingles, and replacement windows. None of these materials have any bearing on the historical integrity of the ward house, and quite frankly, they were either used to conceal or replace the original deteriorated finishes, or used to mitigate the need for repetitive maintenance by Concordia College. Our initiative here is to restore the ward house by preserving architectural elements like the brackets and trim and use materials that are similar to the ones used during its reconstruction in the late 1790s, such as cedar shake siding, hand split cedar roofing shingles, mahogany or cedar trim, copper flashing, and historically accurate wood windows and doors. The proposal for this work was provided to us by Murphy Brothers Builders, located in Mamaroneck, New York. I've had the privilege of working with the Murphy Brothers on a few of my own projects, and their experience and knowledge of renovating and preserving old structures is warranted for a project of this magnitude. Sean Murphy mentioned that he worked with Mr. Tilley before, so I'm sure that Mr. Tilley can also vouch for their professionalism and craftsmanship. It's important to understand that the quote provided by the Murphy Brothers is for exterior work only. They quoted $1,076,455. In order for my client to realize a reasonable return, the house must first become marketable, and as it is in its current state, it is not. We know this because my client hasn't received any bona fide offers that would afford him the opportunity to realize a return on his initial investment. As a result, the interior will also need to be addressed to make the house marketable. So in order to have a complete understanding of the total cost for restoration, I supplemented the quote from Murphy Brothers with interior finishing numbers found in the quote from Adirondack Fisheries. These line items add up to $331,000, resulting in an overall cost of approximately $1.4 million to restore the ward house. Based on my 20 years of experience in architecture and construction management and working on several dozen old structures, unforeseen conditions, much like many of those that were uncovered by Pantech's engineering inspection and report, can absolutely make or break a project. So whenever I'm gearing up to begin working on an old structure, it's important to manage the client's expectations and brace them for what may be uncovered and what will ultimately need to be addressed. I always recommend including a 15% contingency in the construction budget to address the unforeseen conditions. This percentage is only applied to the overall hard cost and not applied to overhead and profit. So 15% of the total hard cost is $186,000, making the total estimated cost of restoring the ward house approximately $1.6 million. We now understand that the delta between reconstructing and restoring the ward house is approximately $700,000. The economic hardship is the fact that the housing market, coupled with the past and present comparative sales, do not support $1.6 million construction budget. And therefore, it is evident that a reasonable return on investment is unattainable if my client is forced to restore the dwelling as it stands today. Thus, the only way for my client to realize a small but reasonable return is solely through reconstruction. To reiterate, reconstruction of the ward house will be cost effective, have a quicker construction timeline, which results in reduced carrying cost. It will be energy efficient and will have low life cycle costs for the end user, all while respecting the existing structure and upholding the character of the Winslow Circle and Gifford Park developments which make up the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to call up Greg Holcomb, who's going to discuss the project and efforts to sell the property.
Madam Chair, Commission members, good evening again.
Good evening.
I think a number of us have been in discussions with respect to this project for roughly 18 to 24 months. And I think that in every situation, every time we've had the discussion, we've indicated that we're willing and happy to work with all the appropriate food groups that have an interest in honoring the site, honoring the home, and honoring the history. But at the end of the day, I think everybody has to recognize, although everybody wants to have skin in the game on this, I'm the only one that's bearing the carrying costs. So we don't need to get into math tonight, but you can do your own calculations. You figure 8.5% money in this day and age. You figure the town taxes, since now this is a taxpayer, I don't get any relief on the taxes, the insurance and all the other additional carrying costs. The longer that this goes on, the more that I have to bear in terms of carrying costs, the less latitude I have to work with everybody and to accommodate all reasonable requests. So we need to understand that, number one. Number two, if the property was as valuable as all the folks here would claim that it is, somebody would have bought it by now. Somebody would have made an offer by now. Somebody would have made a bona fide offer by now. What's a bona fide offer? If any of you all have bought a house, sold a house, bought a condo, sold a condo, it's what's the certainty of a deal? What's the certainty of a close? If I enter into a contract with this potential buyer, will it close? I don't have a bona fide offer. The offer from the friends, as you term them, has 6 months to close, no hard money down, no certainty of a close, no proof of funds, a possible buyer that may or may not exist to contribute the initial financing, no ability to fund operating expenses, no demonstrated ability to raise money at fundraisers from t-shirts and brownies. So if we're going to enter into a deal, it needs to be a deal that has what I call deal certainty. Doesn't exist. The house has been on the market for 86 days, no offers. One inquiry, that inquiry was promptly abandoned once they found out the house was landmarked. So again, as I've indicated before, we're happy to work with everybody, but time is short here relative to the carrying costs on this property, and it's not getting any better. A change of use has been suggested in the past. I don't think the neighbors are going to be happy with that. I'm not speaking for the neighbors, but this is a single-family home zoning area, and I think you'd be opening a can of worms if anybody was to consider an expansion of anything other than single-family zoning, single-family residential home, based on lack of parking, and based on lack of all the other attributes you would need to operate something of a more commercial basis on that site. So, as I've indicated before, I'm not here to lose money, but I am here to help you where I can help you, but I've got no demonstrated path out of this thing based on what I know now, and that's just fact. So I think I don't need to give you any additional brain damage tonight and regurgitate what you're going to hear from Lee and what you're going to hear from Lewis. So I think I'll turn it over to who at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, if there are any questions from the commission, we're happy to address them.
Okay, super. That was a lot of information that was presented. Thankfully, we have had the opportunity to digest quite a bit of that as it was presented in writing prior to this meeting and has been posted on the Tuckahoe.com website. Yes, I think that we do have quite a few questions. I would like to recognize that our commission member, who is an architect, is not here tonight, but we are able to ask any and all relevant questions. I was thinking we could go in order of the legislation. Does that work for everyone as far as our questions are concerned? Okay. And if it's okay, we'll just throw out the question, and whatever member of the team would like to address those questions, please do so. So we start out with the state of disrepair. I think we've spent a lot of time with this term, disrepair. We've seen the Pantech report. We've acknowledged that in the 2 years since the property was purchased, it has not been maintained, which is a requirement of the legislation. So we need to keep that factor in mind. The historic preservation architect who reviewed the certificate of appropriateness refuted the state of disrepair, saying that the ward house is essentially intact and needs what I would characterize as normal repairs rather than exceptional measures. I heard tonight it mentioned that the property was bought sight unseen. Okay, so the property was bought sight unseen, but then when it comes time to put money into the property, it's a shocker, it sounds like. That I wasn't aware that it was bought sight unseen, so that kind of jumped out at me. I had a question about how we get from there to tear it down and rebuild it with a 1.6 million house.
Let me address a couple of items that were said there. So number one, the first comment, Madam Chair, that you made about the property has been maintained, I don't think that's accurate. I also think that's not the standard that's in the historic preservation law. So what the law says is that the landmark is in a serious state of disrepair, not due to the waste or neglect of the property owner. So the property has been untouched since it was purchased. So it is in the same state now that it was when it was purchased and when it was landmarked. So this was not waste. This was not someone who allowed a property to fall into the status that it's in. It's in the same status it is as when he bought it. So effectively, what we're dealing with here is someone who's trying to fix that. That's what this is all about. We are trying to repair the property, and the question is, how do we get there? Do we get there through an extremely cost-ineffective method, or do we get there through a cost-effective method? So I think that's critical in understanding this first factor, that we're not really questioning Mr. Holcomb's devotion to maintaining and repairing this property. It's just a question of how are we going to do that. And what we're asking is for your board to permit us to do it in the way that's not going to cause them a significant loss.
Okay, in that state of disrepair too, it talks. You mentioned quite a few things about the timeline. I have information to fill in some of the gaps that were there. I don't know. It's not necessarily a question, but rather a finding of fact. We can leave that unless it comes up later. But I'm not sure if Mr. Holcomb was aware that there was a historic buildings moratorium put in place that same month that he purchased it. That meetings right here in this room with the Tuckahoe Board of Trustees recognizing the Ward House as a potential historic preservation. We didn't know at the time if it would be a landmark because we didn't have the legislation, but as a potential building of significance in the village goes back to March of 2021. I'm not sure if Mr. Holcomb was aware of that. When I saw the original listing on, I think it was Zillow, or one of those, for the Ward House, it said this historic stately home that was previously prior a dorm. So there was mention of the historic attributes of it, but I don't know if it's worth going back and forth about whether he knew or didn't know that it was historic or not.
Well, I think that is important because there's a difference between a property being historic and being landmarked. So whether Mr. Holcomb knew or didn't know about a moratorium or the fact that Tuckahoe was considering a historic preservation law, I certainly don't think that he should be held to knowledge of a law that wasn't enacted yet, what the restrictions would be in that law, what he'd be allowed to do or not allowed to do based on that law. Buying a historic property is very different from buying a property that is subject to a law that's been enacted, where the buyer can see what the restrictions are, what he's getting himself into. So I certainly don't think, put it this way, I certainly don't think that a court would find that because a property was bandied about as being historic means that the purchaser of that property is on notice of a law that hasn't been enacted yet and what restrictions that he's going to be under when that law gets enacted.
Point taken. I think, though, if we expand the understanding of what you were just saying, though, Dr. Petronello, when he bought the Washington Hotel, there was no historic preservation legislation. Maybe he would have opted not to buy a building in Tuckahoe had he known. Nobody knew until it happened. Mr. Holcomb may have had the most anticipatory notification because it was the same month that the historic buildings moratorium was enacted, which, from what I understand from the Certificate of Appropriateness and now the Certificate of Hardship, there's a big focus on tearing it down as the solution to the problem. But that moratorium was on demolition. So that moratorium was in place before the building was even purchased. But I thank you for answering my questions about what is known. We can rewind a lot to what may or may not have been known, but thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for that first point?
No, I don't.
You bought the property sight unseen?
I could let Mr. Holcomb speak a little bit more about that.
So would I be wrong to follow through with saying, so the intention was to demo the property because of that fact? Or irregardless of the moratorium that was in effect at that time? I just want to know why you would buy a property without looking at it.
Concordia bundled together a number of properties that they intended to sell. In order to purchase those properties, four addresses, in essence, were purchased as is, where is. To answer the chairwoman's original, or to respond, if you will, to the chairwoman's original commentary, moratorium to me is just a yellow light. It's not landmarked, and frankly, historic doesn't bother me. I grew up in Annapolis. I understand historic. So these were purchased essentially for land value. And if you look across the street, you have evidence of what transpired there and what was envisioned across the street when the moratorium was resolved relative to some fact. And there was no fact available at that time in terms of what that moratorium represented in the long run. So they were purchased for land value. There's 2 lots there, owned by 2 different companies. And that's the gist of it, if that answers your question.
Okay, yes, it does. I was unaware that it was a package deal when you purchased the property.
At that time, Iona chose not to have any residential properties as part of the bundle. There's been a number of not-for-profits, including Iona. In fact, frankly, Iona regretted that decision, and there are a number of not-for-profits that would be happy to pick up that property and return it to its original use, which was a dormitory. So that's just the reality of what we're dealing with.
But you were aware of the moratorium at the time of your purchase? Okay, thank you.
And just because we don't hit on an item in order, we can still come back to it, but thank you. Yes. Oh, okay, my turn. Okay, so the next one is the alleged hardship. Now, this gets interesting because the property was purchased 2 years ago. And at our last meeting here as the commission, we received complaints from members of the public that the building was not necessarily being maintained, which is an obligation per the legislation for landmarked owners. There were windows open on cold days. There were a number of complaints that came to us. I don't think now is the time where we want to get into, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is that question of, so the building was bought on, was it August 31st, 2021, and here we are almost October 31st, 2023. Was anything done to keep the building from getting worse within those 2 years? And like I said, I don't know if we need to get into this in great detail, but
With all due respect, Madam Chair, this is nonsense. Number one, I'm aware of any commentary, any building department stipulation that prevent you from opening windows. That's number one. That's just fact. Number two, all the windows were improperly installed in the house. Every single window was improperly installed. They don't shut. They've never shut since they were installed. In fact, Concordia had weather stripping around all the bases of the two sashes where they don't close. There's no water penetration. The house isn't heated, so frankly, who cares if the windows are open half an inch all the way around? If there's a tree limb in a gutter, if you want to send your code enforcement people out all over Tuckahoe and look for houses that have a sapling growing out of a gutter, God bless you. This has no bearing on this discussion in any way, shape, or form about these random, nonsensical complaints about the house not being maintained. You tell me how not closing windows on a house is a failure to maintain it. The house is in exactly the same shape as it was prior, and I'm prohibited from doing anything on the outside anyway. Because once I start removing vinyl siding, which everybody seems to have an affinity for, we got to return it to its historical condition, which then gets in, well, yeah, are you going to let me replace vinyl siding? I'm not even going to discuss it until we resolve these issues. So, you know, the windows, this is ridiculous, with all due respect.
I don't think we have to really get into the windows. The concern was with there was a ton of rain and whether or not that rain contributes to deterioration, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make, and we don't need to.
Nobody's been in the house
That's what I'm saying.
to make even a comment relative to that.
Yeah.
So everybody's getting bamboozled here because people have too much spare time and they just want to nitpick at a house that they don't have any skin in the game on.
I think the point being raised through the example of the windows, which we can drop, but I think the point being raised was, and you seem to be aware, I believe, that it is the obligation of the landmark owner to make sure that the house is maintained, that it doesn't fall into a worse state
The house is maintained as it was when I bought it
or a serious state of repair. That's the point I was trying to make.
for many, many years.
Okay, I don't think we want to get into a back and forth, but my question, yep, fair enough, but we're addressing, related to this,
Madam Chair, let me just
yeah.
let me back it up for a second on this one. So on the self-created hardship issue,
right,
two things. One, we did dutifully. We heard about the issue with the windows and the gutters. We confirmed with your building department, which is the enforcement body, that we're good, and they confirmed that everything is fine at the house.
the windows have been
But
closed.
Nevertheless, alleged self-created hardship, what we're talking about here in this prong, the term self-created hardship under the law, typically what that deals with is if someone's asking for relief for an issue that they themselves did. So if Greg had caused all of the structural issues that we've identified in the Pantech report and then showed up before your board and said, well, because of all this, we've got to knock it down. If Concordia came along and said, we've got to rebuild this property because of all these issues, your board could look at this factor and say, well, all those issues you're pointing out, the reasons you're here to ask for a rebuild are things you did. Then your board could utilize this factor to say, well, maybe that's a reason to turn you down. Although, in fact, the factor itself says that it shouldn't alone be the reason that they're seeking relief. Now, That's not the case here. We're not asking for a reconstruction because of anything to do with gutters or windows. But we can move on.
Fair enough, but let's hang on to that thought because it's going to come up again, what you were just saying about the building and its state. Nobody here has asked anybody associated with 230 White Plains Road to do anything to the exterior and interior of the building. So I want to make it clear that when we get into the financials for the proposed construction, the architectural changes, and all of these costs associated with that, none of us asked for that. I think they're shown as what you would need to do to get the building into a state where you could sell it. I think there's going to be some questions about what does that mean, that the building would be in a state to get a reasonable return. So you were touching on that. We're going to come back to that.
There's two, I mean, now we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but there's two. So there's one is what you said, but also we're nevertheless constrained by the other aspects of the historic preservation law as to what we can do with the exterior. So it's not just about getting it saleable. It's also about, if we're going to do that, if we're going to renovate the property, doing it in a way based on the confinements that we have in the law, which requires it to be of the same look and same materials, et cetera. So that's part of the reason for the quote that you're seeing there. I'll
Yep.
stop.
Mhm.
Go on. More questions.
Well, the architectural part is some of the most interesting, I think, when we get into this. But let me be clear. Dr. Petronella, he went above and beyond. He got mortar that matched the same color of the previous. We are not asking anyone to do that. The building could stay with siding for the next 100 years if the siding protects the building. We are not going to start throwing landmark owners into a financial situation where they now have to throw this building. So what are you going to go back to 1790? Or are you going to go back to 1822 when marble was discovered there? We're not in a debate about what you need to do to make this look as something that it's not. I think at this point, what money needs to be put into this house to get a reasonable return?
Right, correct.
Okay. I jumped ahead. We jumped a little bit ahead. But is anybody with number two?
No, I just want to say, I do think, I know there's a lot of emotion and there's been a lot of back and forth. I think the initial comment was about the question that was brought before us and us doing due diligence to hand that over to enforcement to investigate and to look into that. And we're certainly not suggesting that anyone did anything to destroy, but it is a fair question, and it is one that can be asked, and it's us to forward that and then to revisit that question, because even though I know the windows are open or whatever, but let's face it, a lot of things can happen to properties that are not looked at all. Let's say the owner never went back and never checked in on the property. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen. People can go in and make an encampment in there, or there could be, you know what I mean? I think it's just a fair question to ask, to say, is it being kept? Or is it falling into more disrepair when we don't have the ability to see that? So that was that. And I think that was the spirit of the question and the comment, and we can move on.
Are we moving on? Okay, we're moving on to the next one. So the local landmark and the lot upon which it was situated is incapable of earning a reasonable return. So we're going to need to think about these numbers, what a reasonable return is. And we know the price that Mr. Holcomb paid for the building. I have some questions as to how you got the number at which it's valued now, but I think that comes up. Let's leave that until when we look at demonstrated efforts to sell the property. Unless anybody else has anything for 3?
No.
We'll lump that into 6. Okay, number 4. It cannot be adapted for any other use that could earn a reasonable return. And let's combine that with number 5, that it's unique and does not apply to other landmarks, because I think this is where you get into the zoning issues and concerns and questions. Thank you for pointing out some of the zoning areas of some of the other historic properties in Tuckahoe. There is a longer list that includes other properties that are in residential areas. I thought it was interesting that it was interpreted that way. So we are aware that the building is currently in a residential area. It's the only of the 2 Tuckahoe landmarks, the only one of the 2 that's in a residential area. But there was a list of, I think it was 11, and we expanded it to 13 properties, which are all over the village. So I don't know if we can claim that it's the only one to ever be in a residential area. There are cajillions of historic landmarks locally and nationally that are situated in neighborhoods and business districts. They're all over. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions about that specific location, but I thought it was interesting that that was pointed out specifically.
I think the code, when it references unique and doesn't apply to other landmarks, what that's referring to is Tuckahoe landmarks. So I think what we're talking about here is we're not really concerned about other parts of the country in terms of, I don't think that what Tuckahoe's historic preservation law is saying that this needs to be the one and only in the country that this applies to. The point that we're trying to make is more just, this is the only landmark that is in this way where it can really only be used as a single family home. So we think that should be taken into account.
Okay, I don't think we need to get into a back and forth, but I don't think you can say that there will never ever be a Tuckahoe landmark in a residential area.
Well, there currently aren't any.
Out of the two, correct, correct. But there's a list of, like I said, 11 to 13 that were on the list of potential landmarks. We're going as, we're doing what we can, but there's a lot of work, as you can see, that goes into it. So I think 6 is a big one. So you have to demonstrate that you have tried to find a buyer. Mr. Holcomb mentioned 86 days. If it was listed according to what you submitted on 7/31, it's less than 3 months. I am on the Historic Preservation Commission. I was preparing for tonight's meeting to see that this was listed. I cannot find it. I went to MLS, I went to Realtor.com, I went to Zillow, I just searched. I cannot find it. So I understand that there's a printout, or there was a page in the PDF that shows that there's an MLS. I can't find it. And my question, and I think we were wondering, so we wanted to see, where is it? If I want to buy the Ward House, where would I look?
I'll let Greg.
Might be a conflict of interest, but nevertheless, where would I go?
Madam Chair, I deal with TriCrest Realty, which is now Berkshire Hathaway Realty.
Okay.
They transact numerous residential homes, multi-family buildings, commercial buildings for me, office buildings. If you're interested, you call Lorenzo Senior Relay. It's listed, and he'd be happy to show it to you if you just show him some money. I can't tell you where they sell it, how they sell it. I can tell you it's listed. I can tell you it's been listed since.
And it's on Zillow.
Well, it's been listed.
I checked Zillow as of okay, but
It's been listed since 7/31 at a price of $850 for 86 days. That's all I can tell you.
okay, it's listed at $850. That was in the printout. I couldn't find it.
These people handle 100% of my business transactions, as well as for other people that are active in this area. And trust me, it's listed.
I'm sure he's wonderful. And my question is, why is the burden on a potential buyer to find it when, per the legislation, we need demonstration of good faith efforts to sell it? And if it's hidden in some, okay, maybe now, I don't know when it appeared on Zillow, but
I can't tell you where they list these. I can tell you they do it.
well, you need to tell us because it's in the legislation. You need to demonstrate that it's,
I would be more than happy
if you could, with the submission. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it's been less than 3 months. Are we throwing our hands up and saying that we give up, we tried? That'll lead us into the offer. Do we get into that now? Does anybody else have any other questions?
I think this is a big.
This is a big
This
one.
is one of
Yeah.
the areas we wanted to discuss tonight. So
Because in the submission, it was indicated that there was an offer received. So, Lee, I'm sorry, your name is Mr. Steinmetz? Yeah. Lee, I'm sorry, Levitz. I keep calling you, I think of you as Lee. I'm sorry.
You can call me Lee.
I'm sorry. You mentioned, I think it was you, or maybe was it Mr. Campana, that there was one inquiry into the Ward House. Is that different from the offer made by the Friends of the Ward House?
Yes, Greg knows more about the inquiry. There was an inquiry that was made. Someone was interested in looking at it, but according to Greg, once they learned it was landmarked, they lost interest and didn't make an offer. That is different. We have one formal offer. That's from the Friends of the Ward House. I could talk a little bit about that if your board's if you have a particular question about it.
We're headed in that direction,
Sure.
so
That would be great.
Sure.
sure.
What would you like to know about it? We submitted the offer to your board. I think a copy of it went to you. I think it was for $651, which is significantly less than what Greg's asking price was. It represents, in our view, it appears that they came up with the offer because that's the amount that Greg paid for the two lots together. And we note that the Friends of the Ward House offers for the two lots. I was contacted by an attorney representing the Friends of the Ward House to communicate this offer to me. And I asked for proof of funds as well as to be put in contact with the attorney representing the who the buyer would be, or who the donor would be, I suppose. I was told that I couldn't speak to the attorney, that they wouldn't put me in touch with him. I asked for the offer to be put in writing, which it was, which we then submitted to you. In good faith, Greg made a counteroffer, which was denied, and the Friends of the Ward House came back with their own counteroffer, which was for the same amount, $651, except they added some additional conditions to it, namely that it would be 6 months to close. They wanted an inspection of the property to be done by Mr. Tilley. So suffice it to say that the number, as well as the number, would cause Greg to suffer significant loss, which makes it too low. But the conditions also were unacceptable, and we couldn't really engage in a real negotiation because no one would put me in touch with the attorney. But Greg was open to negotiating, but it just didn't happen.
So it's off the table.
What's off the table?
The Friends of...
No, I mean, we're happy to, like I said, we're happy to negotiate. It's just that their number hasn't moved, and the number is the same as what Greg paid for it, so he'd suffer a significant loss if he were to accept it.
So you're looking to sell the property for $850, I believe, right? Is that what it's listed for?
It's listed for $850.
And I'm just the only reason why I'm asking is because it's that the number that the Friends of the Ward House have to achieve in order.
Let's talk concept, if you don't mind, sir. It's listed at $850.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a bona fide offer, what's a bona fide offer? An offer that has a certainty of a close. As I indicated earlier tonight, if you were selling your house, if you're going to enter into a contract, you want some reasonable chance that the thing's going to close. How does a buyer demonstrate that they have a high probability of a close? Cash in the bank, 10% down hard money. If you don't buy it, you lose your 10%. 6 month close, subject to, is not a bona fide deal. And I don't spend time on those.
Okay.
It's that simple. So if somebody came today and said, you know, I'll give you X, doesn't have to be $850, but it has to close. It has to be, you're buying it as is, where is. Don't have that. The minute I get one of those, I'm happy to end everybody's pain and move on. But that does not include the back lot. It's for the front house only. Everybody's enamored with the house. They can have the house. But if we're trying to include an additional building lot in the deal, then you can't afford it. Everybody has a budget. If your budget's only X, if you're that enamored with the house, if you're that hell-bent on saving the house, buy it and save it. I'm not opposed to anybody buying the house, but I'm funding this, and I'm getting to the end of the line in terms of what I'm willing to spend just to perpetuate this thing. Like I said before, just you figure the carrying cost. You're a smart guy. It's significant. Goes another 2 years, a lot more money. My cost has to go up, or I take a loss. You certainly understand this, sir.
I'm fully aware of it. That's why I'm asking you these questions.
And just to put a finer point on two things that Greg indicated, so to be more direct, he said it doesn't have to be $850. I think you're trying to get at it.
No, I'm.
And I don't want to publicly disclose, what my client's, what he'd be willing to sell it for.
No,
You need
I
to
get it.
prejudice him in that way, but what I can say is that he made a counter offer, which was rejected.
Okay.
And the other piece that I think Greg sort of alluded to, there was some skepticism about the Friends of the Ward House offer. It's obviously, there's no secret this has been a somewhat contentious issue, particularly with the Friends of the Ward House. And the fact that they have quite a bit of detail about the structural issues with the house. We submitted an engineer's report detailing all the structural issues. So it was curious to Greg why they would need Mr. Tilley to come in and do an inspection of the house before they bought it, given that we've already outlined all the structural issues. And they want the very same expert that they've retained to go against Mr. Holcomb here to do an inspection during a 6-month close window. It kind of gave the impression that this was more towards generating some ammunition to be used against Greg than it was to make a bona fide offer here, dovetailing with the fact that the offer was for both the house lot as well as the neighboring lot, and what's been deemed historic is the house lot. So it was unclear to us why the Friends of the Ward House were looking to acquire a building lot next door to it in addition, which is owned by a separate company. It appeared more that they were interested in gaining value here than actually preserving the house. So I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to make sure your board heard that because it was important in our factoring.
With all due respect, I don't know if it's within the purview of this commission to ask any buyer to buy it sight unseen, because besides this situation, I know very few people who go into large purchases sight unseen. We can get into what that will involve, but I think it falls under 6A and B. So I think if I could ask for the team to provide that information specifically for 6A and B. So we can disclose the bargaining numbers. We can and need to. We need to see that it was listed at this, there was an offer of this. A qualified real estate agent, as in 6B, denies that that's reasonable and says it should be this. 6A and B are the documentation I think that we'll need that we haven't seen yet.
We're happy to provide it, and we will. And I just want to make clear one other item. Some of the negotiations occurred after we made a submission also. So we submitted the initial offer, I think, with the submission, and then some of the back and forth happened afterwards. So it post-dates what we provided to your board. We'll be happy to do so before the next meeting.
Okay, but thank you for pointing out. So we have a 650, we have an 850. We're not talking, oh, well, I'll leave that. Okay, so we have some real numbers. Anybody else with that? With 6, I think we do have some more questions, which thank you for providing when you can. Yeah, so with 7, these cost estimates that have been discussed, I think I alluded to this when we were earlier on a point, but I think we're going to need to know what needs to go into this house to get it so that it can be sold. I don't think we want the $1,000,000,000 version, and I don't think we want the sloppy, not sustainable. We're talking about a longevity of a historic landmark version either. So I think that the numbers that were provided, somebody went through and made a big list, but I think we have a lot of questions about what are you talking about with the doors? Why do you need to, for example, why would all of the doors need to be replaced into some, tens of thousands of dollars doors when you're not supposed to touch the doors to begin with? Meaning, nobody's asking you to go buy 1790s doors, and nobody's hoping that you're going to go buy Home Depot doors. But if the doors are okay, the landmark is supposed to be considered as an existing entity, right? Anything that could damage the timber or the foundation, anything of it needs to be carefully considered. So while the estimate, I think, looked at like, we're just going to rip it all off, and this is how much it's going to cost to make it something else, I don't know if that's where we should be starting when we look at costs for a renovation that would get this to market. if I don't know if that was a question, but maybe it is. If I don't know if you want to come back to us or how we evolve this conversation. So you say to us, listen, it's not going to cost $1.6 million to get it on the market, or is it? It's going to cost 400. It's going to cost, I don't know. What needs to be done to the exterior? Or, unfortunately, we don't have much control over the interior, right? But what needs to be done to get this to the market, the reasonable rate of return, or avoiding a loss? Can we start there?
So in terms of the doors, just because that was part of the question, it's not just a door. They're pretty substantial doors, and there's one on the front, one on the back. There's one down in the basement, and also one on the third floor. So that cost is divided up amongst all of those doors. The reason why we had specified to the builder that we want to use materials true to the history of the house is because that's what it is laid out in the regulations. Otherwise, it'd be a Home Depot door. So, and quite honestly, doors, an entry door can run $4,000 or $5,000. Because we're fitting within existing openings as well, because that has to do with the existing framing of the house.
Yep.
Right. So they're all custom.
Does the door need to go? I don't know if you want to answer that right now because we're just picking on the doors. But I think the question regarding all of this gut and replace is of the mindset of we all need all new doors or no one will ever buy this house.
It's not gut and replace. For instance, behind the aluminum siding, the vinyl siding, there are portions of old cedar shake shingles, right? So part of the regulation is to match that material, right?
I don't know if it is, though. And I don't want to get into it back and forth, but I don't think that we should interpret the legislation as putting some unattainable burden on a landmark owner to go back in time starting right now so that they're going to blow all this money that they'll never ever get back. Nobody's asking that.
It says here, deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, material.
Exactly. So you could interpret that as there's there's siding. You could say, oh, if it's deteriorated, I just have to replace the siding. And that would be a valid conversation for this commission to have.
That's perfectly fine, but we just want to stay true to the building.
Yeah, so that's why these certificate of appropriateness meetings for replacement and repair are pretty, they're cool, right? Because you're looking at the history of it, but they're pretty serious, where you look at, it's going to cost $1 kajillion to do this, it's going to cost this. What do we do? Those are really fun conversations that can be held. My point being that this legislation exists so that those conversations are held, not that someone feels burdened that they have to make the house look like some historic thing that it wasn't when they bought it. If we just keep it from falling down, maintaining it, that's the starting point. So, yeah.
Okay. So to go along with my discussion
Yeah.
earlier about unforeseen conditions, when these items are removed from the house, right, to replace them with another material, whether it be wood or hardy board, something along those lines, that structure is from 1790.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People love that.
So that contingency that goes in there stays in there, whether you're reducing the quality of the material or not, right? Because that's an unforeseen condition that needs to be allocated for in terms of cost.
Fair enough, but does the siding need to go today? Is a question. I don't know if you want to answer that now, but it's a question that could be applied to everything in this document that
But if
says
the
it needs to go.
If the windows are not installed properly, allowing air leaking, right? Air leakage also goes to energy efficiency and the new energy conservation laws.
I know.
I could get into it.
No, but the property owner has to do that anyway, whether or not they want to sell it or not. The property owner has the obligation to make sure that the house does not deteriorate. So if the windows need repair, the owner of the house has to repair them. But keep track of your receipts because it's part of the economy of property owning, right? But I don't know if the debate is about whether or not that takes place in the context of hardship. You're a property owner. Your property needs work. You put work into it. What we don't want is an extra burden where there's hardship, there's economic hardship. Nobody wants anybody going bankrupt or, God forbid, letting the house fall into a serious state of repair. Said, I just threw my hands up. Nobody wants that. What we want is to figure out what needs to be done to this house so that it's in a state for a reasonable return. Or maybe someone will buy it before then.
So, I understand that you don't have purview on the interior of the house, but during Concordia College's ownership of this building, and all of the records are just down the hallway here, none of those interior renovations were on record. Therefore, all illegal renovations, right? There's maybe 5 or 6 multi-stall bathrooms scattered throughout the house. Once that gets gutted, everything gets exposed. Things have to be replaced. So it's a domino effect, especially with these old houses. You don't know what that structure looks like until those exterior elements are removed. For instance, as an example, 100-year-old house in Nurse Shell, I had the privilege to design a major renovation for. We gutted the interior with the intention of just gutting the interior and redoing some of the exterior. From the interior, everything seemed perfectly well. The structure, spoke to the client, this looks great. As soon as we took down about 3 feet of the exterior finish from the outside of the house, it exposed water damage, termite damage, and the studs were not even hitting the plate on the exterior of the house. We supported the entire second floor, reframed the entire first floor under the second floor for a cost of $175,000. So these unforeseen conditions grow dramatically, and they add up very quickly if it is not done correctly.
A valid point that I believe is applicable to pretty much any home or building, but when you go into it, you find things you weren't expecting. I think what we're looking at here is how we can avoid economic hardship for the parties involved, if it's at all in our ability to do so. Did you have something else? Did any?
Just trying to give the right answer.
Okay, so we definitely need more info for 6A and B. I think what I'm asking for is whether or not you're going to have it right away or you're going to start thinking about this, but you provided this one estimate with the understanding that this building is for the benefit of the property owner as well, frozen in time, and nobody's asking you to make it look like it's 1790 or 1822 or whatever year you want. With that in mind, what would need to go into it from a construction cost to get it onto market? I think that you have one version of that. I would ask you to could think about another version as well. I don't know if I'm asking them to provide that as a requirement, but I think, am I making sense in my question where I'm going with this? Okay.
I think so.
If I may,
So it says here, new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy the historic materials. So we have to stay consistent with the historic. That's why this is one of the provisions of being a landmark, right? So, for instance, if the Washington Hotel, all of a sudden, the stones started spalling off because of framing issues or whatever it was, and they came back and said, oh, we're just going to do red modular brick. Are you okay with that?
So the certificate of appropriateness meetings are held for any exterior changes. Right. And I think Stephen Tilley, the architect, the historic preservation architect, made a related point when he spoke to this commission. And last meeting, I didn't bring it with me, but I had the Secretary of Interior's standards for buildings, historic buildings. So this question comes up all the time. And as Stephen Tilley indicated, there is a continuum. There's a history in that house. And nobody's saying that you need to make it 1790s. You might have one part of the house that's older than the other. it's all valid. It's all part of that building's history. So these are the meetings that we have where we look at, well, what are cost concerns? What are time period interests? What are historic documentations that can validate what it may have looked like? These are all the things that come into play when you're looking at a renovation. So nobody's saying, what year do you think? What year do you think? Let's make the house look like that. So while I appreciate, I really do, you're digging into this concept in historic preservation, which is, yeah, we want to maintain the historic integrity of it, the fabric. That's why it's landmarked. But nobody's wants an undue burden on you to feel like you have to make this house look like George Washington's right around the corner. And I'm trying to make the point that what do you mean by historic? What do you mean? So nobody wants a Home Depot door on there. But there's a whole range of doors that could be somewhere in between. And the doors that are there are fine for now, unless they're allowing in moisture. Am I making my point? Because I feel like I'm really going on about this.
That's what makes
That's
it
don't.
saleable.
Okay.
Because the people who end up purchasing the house, the end user, is going to have to replace those items. And people look at what they spend, they look at the comps in the area, and they look at where they will be after they spend the money, and that turns them away from the sale or from the purchase.
So that's going to get into 6A and B. So if we can get a real estate agent to put some documentation behind that, I like there's some really cool shows out now where people buy these historic homes and they spend years turning them into their vision of what the historic time period should be. And if it falls within what they are allowed to do per the legislation, they can do that. So there are buyers out there who want to take this 1790s timber that you'll never find again and do something with it. If the current owner doesn't want to do that, we're not saying that they have to. We're saying that you can't tear it down unless you can prove that you are going to suffer all of this economic hardship. And then when you do want to repair stuff, what you got? What is your idea? What are your cost constraints? How can we help?
So, for instance, the information that we'll give you would be a third cost estimate or construction estimate that will use materials in kind, but not of the same quality. That's the only way to get to that point.
That's one interpretation of what I just said, and it's a valid one. But what can the windows? Okay, the windows are a sore subject. I'm gonna. But can the foundation or the part of the building where the sloping, can that be fixed? Can you fix the sloping and then someone will buy it? For example, is there a certain thing that can be knocked out and now a buyer will say, okay, good, it's not falling down?
I believe the last time we were here, Mr. Tilley had explained that jacking up old timber like that is detrimental to the structure. So the answer to the question is no.
I meant exterior ground sloping, but let's not get into the back and forth.
I understand.
Did I make my point? Can we move on, or does anyone else?
We can, but
yeah.
One of the other points is that these laws that were put into place also talk about the site, and the site should be maintained as is.
Totally.
And that's what we're doing.
It's your obligation as a landmark owner. Absolute your obligation from day one that you buy it. Yep.
We don't want to change that grading.
Okay.
If I may,
Sure.
I think what the chairwoman's trying to say here is, or maybe I shouldn't. When I watch these TV shows, I know there was reference, flip the house and all that. What drives me crazy when I watch these shows is they're always looking to buy the Home Depot door, whereas, and I understand that the property owner needs to make a profit. Whereas in my world, I would try or be able to afford the best door I can buy. Not having been inside the Ward House, which I think is I'm going to request at some point in time, because I have two conflicting reports from two certified architects, engineers, and whatever else. And
Mr. Tilley's report?
Yes,
He was never in the house.
okay, but I have never been in the house either. So I would like to see all these deficiencies that have been pointed out by Pantech, as well, as the counter that Mr. Tilley said, it's not structurally damaged. But I also appreciate the fact that you and Mr. Holcomb want to build a quality home. So I don't want to get into, speaking for myself. I'm not up here to tell you to buy a Home Depot door, because I know if you put a door that's made in, I don't know, wherever they make great doors, that you're going to look for a return on that property when you put those doors in the home. Am I correct on that? That would be something that you would say to a potential buyer, look at this, I have granite or quartz, or, we don't want you to put, I wouldn't say put Formica in the house.
No, not at all.
And that's not our
I think-
job.
I
That's
think
not the job of this commission.
At the minimum, it would be to the standard and quality of the house that's being built across the street.
Exactly.
It's a custom door.
Exactly. Okay. But bear in mind, I just want you to know, that I have not been inside the house. So I am going on blind faith when it comes to reading these 375-page report that was supplied to us with the photographs, all that stuff. I'm good with that, but I would like to see it for myself as well. I would like to be there with the rest of the members of this committee as well, especially Laszlo, seeing as he's an architect. Or
So Lee and I will speak to Greg, and we'll get back to you.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, so we are asking for more information regarding 6 and 7. This is where we get into the money, as related to economic hardship. You did demonstrate, you didn't demonstrate attempts to apply, but you demonstrated research regarding economic incentives or funding available through federal, state, city, or private programs. And while we appreciate the research, the next step of that would be to demonstrate. So it was you've heard all the questions, specifically 6, 7, and 8, if you guys could kindly get back to us.
So the only thing I'll say on number 8 is I don't think it's the onus on the property owner to spin their wheels, so to speak. So part of what we've done is, and I thought particularly on this factor went somewhat above and beyond, is rather than undertake a useless effort to put in applications that are going to go nowhere and spend a ton of money doing so, we spent still a significant amount of money getting a professional to come in and tell us, what should we apply for, what could we apply for. That professional identified a series of grants that could be available and opined that, for the most part, most of them are not available. Identified, I think there were 2 that were available, and we've articulated that those are not going to be in the range that would make a difference given the price quotes that we received. So we'll look at that. What we'll do is we'll come back to you on I think it was 6 and 7 you said. If all of a sudden the delta changes such that the quotes on the grants make a difference, then we're happy to look into those further. But if we're still talking about, I detailed this in our report, but for example, the Odell House, which was spoken about by Mr. Tilley at the last meeting, they received a grant. They received a grant from one of the bodies that our professional identified that we could potentially receive a grant from. That grant was $7,500. So we're not talking, I don't think the onus is on the property owner to spend his time, money, and efforts to go out and try to get a $7,500 grant when the numbers we're talking about, that's not going to make really a big difference here. Happy to keep it open, but I just wanted to make sure your board heard that because unless the delta moves on the actual quotes, then those kind of figures aren't going to make a difference.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed reading what you put in there. Legislation says demonstrate. You presented a temporary solution. Let's see how it goes. But we do have the demonstration requirement in the legislation. That is what it is.
I understand. I also just want to. I mean, we're here at the end now, so I'll just close by saying I don't think I think that you should speak with also your attorney about how to interpret this law as well, because I don't think that the way that the law is set up here is to say, well, you need to satisfy each of these components, and you need to have tapped the well on every single component, and if you haven't turned over every single stone with respect to every single component, you get denied. That's not how this works, I think. it's a balancing test, and your board needs to look at this test and each factor and identify, was enough done on balance on each of these factors that it merits granting the certificate of hardship. So that's what we're asking your board to do. That being said, happy to come back on the items that we discussed, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. On that note, which is exactly what we are here to do. Let us now, with this option of continued questions, invite the public. I think now is a good time. Our very patient group of participants tonight. In order to do so, I'd like to ask for a motion. Let's go into the public hearing. If I could ask for a motion to open up the public hearing to consider the certificate of hardship application for 230 White Plains Road, aka the Ward House. To open that, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the public hearing is now open. So anyone and everyone who would like to speak specifically on the certificate of hardship is welcome to do so at this time. We don't have a list or order of anything, so I think it's...
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good evening.
Gary Rappaport for the Friends. I don't really know where to begin. I'm not even sure why we're here because of the Article 78 that I mentioned in my submission to you. The biggest fish is challenging your designation of this property as a historic landmark in Tuckahoe. So I think until that's really resolved, this has been edifying, but I think really we should hold off on the principles of judicial economy or judicial efficiency. Let's see what the court says on whether this property is a landmark or not. Why should we be going through this very extensive, very rigorous process until that determination has been made? But I think another thing that's really clear from this, two things, is that your statute is the right statute because it shows it's a rigorous process. It's a very high bar to take a landmark and allow it to be torn down and demolished and dispensed with. That is what the statute says here. It's a very high bar, very rigorous. It's not designed, and I think it's very clear what we have here. It's the second point I want to make, is that we had an owner who bought a property, several properties, without even inspecting them. There's no evidence he had an appraisal, economic analysis. The landmark hardship law is not designed to extricate someone who made a reckless business decision. And that's what it's clear what he did here. He just bought this property. He didn't come with an appraisal, economic analysis, brokers, estimates, construction formulas. He came with a sledgehammer. That's what he wanted to do. He said he bought it for land value. He admitted that to you. So again, there's been no meeting of the standard here at all whatsoever. 6A, 6B, dispensed with it. Number 8, I think the last thing on your agenda here, on your statute, he wants to rewrite it. Says, I don't have to demonstrate it. I just have to make some noise that I talked to some expert about some possible grants and things like that. I don't have to do anything. He wants to ignore the statute, wants to rewrite it. He shouldn't let them do that. This is, well, in one hand, a sophisticated buyer, but on the other hand, a reckless buyer. We should not be rewarding that type of conduct here. We should not be excusing it. There was a moratorium in place. He admitted to you. He knew about it. And he went ahead and bought this. Could have said to Concordia, hey, wait a second. Things changed. Let's renegotiate. Let's talk about it. Take this out of the package. Didn't do that. Proof of funds. I don't know what Mr. Lefkowitz is talking about. The person who's providing the proof of funds submitted the proof of funds, the $651,000. He showed he has it. I don't know what he's talking about. The offer we made, the only contingency was to benefit him, except for some of the other, they didn't like the number we had. The contingency was he objected to Mr. Tilley going into the property, and as Mr. Luisi said, who buys a property like this without even looking at it? So we said, let Mr. Tilley go in, or our experts or engineers, and whatever report they make, whatever findings they have, they will be governed by a non-disclosure agreement. In other words, I can't come to this board and say, aha, I got you. That's what he told you we were going to do. We said no. We said we were going to have it under a full non-disclosure agreement. Mr. Lefkowitz didn't disclose that to you, but I will. I'll provide you with the offer if you want that. I can email it to you later tonight or whatever it might be. So, again, I don't understand why we're here really tonight. There's been no meeting, no real good faith effort to meet the high bar standards of establishing a reason why this landmark designation should be ignored and that the hardship application should be granted. It's completely premature, both the Article 78, the pending appeal before the village board, and of course, many of the omissions and misstatements and misrepresentations made here tonight. So I think that I understand the board is probably going to continue this, but at this stage, this has been a completely inadequate, rushed application. And I think, again, it's just a continuation of what I've said from earlier, that Mr. Holcomb is coming here, not in good faith, not in a bona fide effort to do the maximum. He's doing the minimum or non-existent. He's coming with a sledgehammer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we did receive the submission and under consideration. Thank you.
Sal Provenzano, President, Friends of the Ward House, 11 River Street, Tuckahoe, New York. I do wanted to just mention that I went through each one of these criteria myself, and I'm not gonna bore everyone in going through every single one of them. But I have to say that one of the things that really struck me, first of all, Mr. Holcomb did say that he had to buy this as a package, right? It was something that was unbreakable. So he bought 4 properties from Concordia College during the bankruptcy, and supposedly the Ward House was something that he could not strip out. So if that's the case, then to me it's only logical that if we're looking at an economic hardship, then it should be looked upon as a whole. All 4 properties should be looked upon regarding an economic hardship, because he had to buy it as a package, so you look at it as a package. Now, I know that one of the properties that was in that package, I believe it's on Hobart Street, was listed for $690,000, and Mr. Holcomb sold it for $1.275 million. This is public record. It's not something I'm making up, and God bless him. There's nobody here that says that a developer that puts their money on the line shouldn't make a profit. But that's one of the properties. He's also got 2 houses that are going up in the Dutch Schultz house across the street. And those houses are probably going to fetch a lot of money. And then, of course, there's the Fulling house in Bronxville, which he's gotten the okay from Bronxville to move forward on that. So I'm sure that in Bronxville, it's going to make sense, to do what he does. And again, no one here with Friends of the Ward House fought at all against those other properties. But there's one thing that I'm a little confused at, and I just to give you a little bit of background, I'm educated as an accountant. I have my master's in accounting. I work in the insurance industry, so the replacement value of houses is very important to us when we're establishing how much a house should go for. And I did do real estate years ago, so I understand the way that comps work and all that other stuff. But I guess one of the questions that I want to direct to Mr. Campagna. Now, I know that in the 370-page application that you had, you ended up resubmitting the house that you were going to be putting up in place of the Ward House. Remember there was that house? Yeah, and I believe that in looking at it, it's 2,985 square feet, that house, right? The one that you had that you were going to replace the Ward House with. It isn't?
So can I just say this is a commission discussion, not a back and forth between people. So,
right, so anyway,
you can ask whatever question you want, but the discussion, yeah.
So I read the application and I saw that there was that you know, Mr. Holcomb included all of the stuff, and he included Tilly's report again too, which was nice. But I'm having a problem understanding the economics of replacing the Ward House with another structure that's, say, 2,900 square feet. That's what I read in there. Because if we just do the math of $375 a square foot, which is lowballing it, you're getting now toward Home Depot land, okay? At 2,900 square feet, that means that the house would come in somewhere about 1.2 million in order to be built. This is not counting for any profit. This is not counting for demolition. This is not counting for permits. And Mr. Holcomb paid $651 for the lot. So just simple math. We're talking 1.8 million would be what that house would have to be sold for, okay? So when I looked through the comps on Winslow Circle, most of the houses in Winslow Circle, if you're looking at Realtor.com, they're somewhere in the $700,000 range. There's two houses that come in at about $950,000, and they're all interior in that Winslow Circle, okay? So if you look at the Ward House lot, it's probably the worst lot of all of the properties that Mr. Holcomb bought. Now, why do I say that? It's because it sits on Route 22, and it's right next to a bus stop, and there's a traffic light on Winter Hill Road. So if you're going up Winter Hill Road and you're stopped at that light, then the new house that Mr. Holcomb was planning on putting, you're going to have people's headlights that are going to go into their house from that part. So my question is, how can you imagine getting between 1.8 and $2 million for a house where there's no other house that's even half of that? And the lot itself, I mean, we love the historical aspect of the Ward House, but let's face it, it's in a really junky lot because of it's sitting on 22 next to a bus stop. I don't see the economics of Mr. Holcomb making money. In fact, in looking at his opportunity to cut his losses, he's probably better off taking the $651,000 that we're offering him for this, rather than having a house on the market that's going to be unsellable and that we've had to destroy a landmark in the process of. So unless I am not, unless I'm defying the laws of economics and real estate, I'm not seeing it. And I have to say that the house that I saw in the plans, it looks like a very nice house on another lot, but absolutely not destroying a historic landmark, which is without question. So, I mean, essentially, that's really what I want to lead. If we're talking about economic hardship, I would love the commission to walk away with 2 points. First of all, if Mr. Holcomb was forced to buy a package, then he has to use the package as his economic hardship. He cannot slice. I mean, if he got 3 doves and a dog, he can't let the dog lead the way. Okay? It's got to be looked at as an investment as a whole. Okay? That's number one. Number two, I don't see the economics within even the house that Mr. Campagna put in the plans that he was going to replace the Ward House with. It doesn't make economic sense for that lot. And the third thing I'm going to say is, let's just put everything right in the middle. That house is not on the market. I looked in Realtor.com, I looked in Zillow, I looked in Redfin, I looked all over. It says house sold September 1st, okay? Not for sale. I don't know what the rationale was, because nobody in their right mind would pay $850,000 for that house with the odious terms that were put on there. I mean, put it out there, let people see it. Why would you want to hide the listing? Because I'm under the understanding that in order for that listing not to appear on those sites, that the MLS had to be manually overwritten to do that. It's called a pocket listing. So why would you do that if you don't have to? I don't get it. So, my conclusion is the Ward House, of course, is a historic treasure of Tuckahoe and beyond. The building needs to be protected and nurtured to serve the needs of our children and community. The developer acquired the Ward House knowing full well that it was a historic structure and that the village intended to protect it. It has no hardship. Mr. Lefkowitz was in this room on August 11th when the moratorium was talked about. He objected to the moratorium on August 11th, 2021. It's in the minutes of the meeting. I looked it up. Friends of the Ward House have provided a cash offer to buy the Ward House site and make Mr. Holcomb whole. Has no hardship. The developer does not meet any of the hardship criteria of the law. It has no hardship. The commission, in our estimation, should deny the hardship. And most importantly, and I appreciate you chasing on this, the house has to be sealed. I mean, when you buy a house 2 years ago, you can't expect it to be in the same position that it's in now if you do nothing to seal it, to mothball it. And that's in the law. I mean, it's not even, and I know that Mayor Andino, at the last meeting, she assured me that the law would be enforced, and I'm glad that she did. But, we're not trying to be contentious here. Nobody's going to make money in Friends of the Ward House with this. Once we get possession of that house, hopefully, God willing, that's when the fun begins of trying to then get the funds, get the grants, get the preservation going. More work. And nobody's going to, but it's for our children, and it's for our children's children. This is not just a red and white, black and white transaction. It's the legacy of the village of Tuckahoe and the town of Eastchester and the village of Bronxville. We have such an opportunity here. And I believe that Mr. Holcomb and I can sit down and we can make this work. I have nothing against him regarding his desire to make a profit. But what we have to do is we have to put it within the context of the law, and we have to do it in a way that's thoughtful, that follows the law, and that becomes a legacy, really, for the village of Tuckahoe and New York State as a whole. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Ms. Steinhagen. Would you be able to read Section 6 of the law to me? Say that again? Oh, my name is Jack Flannery of
Thank you.
Eastchester.
I know you, Jack, but the rest of the world.
So they talked about qualified real estate agents. I happen to be a realtor. So could you read Section 6 of that for me about demonstrated efforts to sell?
Yeah, Section 6, that demonstrated efforts to find a purchaser interested in acquiring the property have failed, including A, any listing of property for sale or rent, price asked, and offers received within the previous 2 years, and B, testimony and relevant documents regarding any real estate broker or firm engaged to sell or lease the property, reasonableness of price or rent sought by the applicant, or any advertisements placed for the sale or rent of the property.
So speaking of advertisements for this property, if I wanted to sell the Ward House, I would want just listed sign. I would want just listed postcards. I would want a for sale sign. I would also want it to be on Zillow or Realtor. And any of you now can look, just Google 230 White Plains Road for sale. It's not in there. So I don't think that there's a reasonable effort to actually sell the home. The other thing is that he has multiple LLCs. This Ward House deal isn't Mr. Holcomb's only deal. In fact, he's a great, real estate developer model because he has 7 LLCs with properties in Yonkers, with other properties in Eastchester, They mentioned the property that he sold for a $576,000 profit last year. So there's quite a lot that I think indicates that there's not a hardship and that there's not a good enough effort to actually sell the home. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marion Schaefer, a student. I'm a senior at Bronxville High School. So I've done 3 years of independent studies through Bronxville about the Revolutionary War and what took place in Bronxville, Eastchester, and Tuckahoe. Through this, I have learned a lot about our local history and the importance of local history. I have talked to many people and presented to elementary school classes about local history, trying to educate people on what happened and why this is important. I have never met anyone who is not impressed or interested. I have many people that agree with me about the importance of local history and why the Ward House is important for preservation. I have here a petition that was signed at the time I printed it out by 231 community members of Bronxville, Eastchester, and Tuckahoe, notably including residents and people who live or have lived on Winslow Circle, neighboring the Ward House. I'm going to read the petition now. Dear members of the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Commission, we, students, teachers, and residents of Tuckahoe, Eastchester, and Bronxville, urge you to deny Big Fish Westchester LLC's Certificate of Hardship application to demolish the building at 230 White Plains Road, known as the Ward House. We believe that this 18th century house has tremendous educational value because it stands testament to the rich and important history of our community. It recalls armed conflict, civilian suffering, and political divisions in the land that now comprises the villages of Tuckahoe, Bronxville, and the town of Eastchester during the American Revolution and at the time of the creation of our nation. The Ward House is the legacy of our local founding fathers. Please vote for preservation. As I said, this is 231 signatories. I would also like to add that rebuilding with new materials is not the same as keeping the original. The fact that this is an original and historic property makes it special. The developer is proposing a replica, but I believe that historic buildings should be approached with reverence. Reverence and awe, because we can learn so much and gain so much by having historical, tangible landmarks, which the Ward House is. The Ward House offers a invaluable link to the history of Tuckahoe, and I believe it should be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We will definitely accept this as part of the public record, and I'm so happy that you're back because your civic action is commendable. Your interest and knowledge of local history is something that I hope you're proud of, and I'd like to say that I'm happy for you. So thank you.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Peter McGovern from Wilton, Connecticut. My connection to the area is I lived on Winslow Circle. My family did for 43 years. I went to Immaculate Conception School for 9 years, and I own a prep for high school. But I just want to raise 3 points from what was discussed tonight. My profession is a banker. I'm a commercial banker. I've been in the business for 40 plus years. I've lent to a number of different businesses and to real estate developers and have financed a number of projects that involve bulk purchases. I do not know anything specific about this deal other than what was raised, presented at the meeting tonight, but I had speculated a while back that, because I have a dialogue with the Friends of the Ward House, that the applicant, the buyer of the property, did not have an individual negotiation with Concordia College to come up with a purchase price, fair market value of $651,000 for that property. I will speculate, and it can be refuted, but there was one negotiation, and let's say 4 properties involved, each at $650,000, probably settled on a bulk price of maybe $2.5 to $3 million. And then when the closing occurred, the value of each property was just assigned at the closing. It's not a fair market number. as already been mentioned, there was no appraisal on the properties ahead of sale. It was a bulk purchase, take it or leave it. And usually in bulk purchases, the seller wants to sell everything. The seller does not want to be left with a lemon, because then he can't sell that at all. So this, I don't know what due diligence the buyer went through to acquire this this bulk purchase, but the economics of the deal is as a package, not individual lots that were separately negotiated. There were not 4 separate closings, I am certain. There was one closing. I assume it was a total cash deal, because there's no mortgage filing that I understand. So comments were made tonight that Mr. Holcomb paid $651, or he needs to be made whole of $651. That is a fiction. His project is the $2.5 to $3 million in total that he paid, and he's looking at the economics of the project. So you have to look at all 4 properties that he is developing to look at the overall economics. And he may very well, since it was admitted that he did not, he bought the project as is, where is, sight unseen. So there was really no upfront due diligence. He just knew that these were properties. Maybe he did a drive-by, I don't know, but the speculation was, I would assume, just going to bring a sledgehammer and buying the land. That's what there were knockdowns. A lot of knockdowns in Eastchester the last 20 years that I've seen. So when we talk about making Mr. Holcomb whole, it should not be looked at from the view of, oh, he paid $651, because he did not. He paid the bulk price, and then he or his attorney or somebody allocated that purchase price to the 4 different properties on whatever methodology. Might have been tax-driven, I don't know. But that $651 is not a market price per se. There's no fair market arm's length negotiation that did occur for 230 White Plains Road. So that's just the first point. The second point is the use of the building that, we moved on that street in 1959. I was 9 years old. And as long as I can remember, it was a dormitory. And always cars parked out front, always activity going on. We liked the summer because it was quiet, but it was never, my experience from 59 to when I sold the house for my mother in 2003, it was never a single-family house, always owned by Concordia and used as a dormitory during those years. And actually, Iona College used it as a dormitory, I think, for the prior 20, 25 years. And Iona was leasing it from Concordia. So that was just, I want to make that point that and I can't speak for any of the current residents. I think since 2003, most of our old neighbors have moved off the street. So, but we were just used to the dormitory activity at the top of the street. The cars there, sometimes the noise. And I lived across the street, number 30 Winslow Circle, which is directly across and one house down. So it was just part of our life growing up. Just compliment something that Sal said, the Friends of the Ward House said. That section of White Plains Road is not ideal. Even living one house down, there's a lot of street noise. Trucks coming down. We'd hear it at night. I know there's now a traffic light there. I don't know when that light was installed, but that traffic light was not there when I lived there. It must have been installed in the last 10 years or so. But it is a noisy street, and the Ward House literally is about 10 feet off the road. So, if you put up a very expensive house there, I think that would be a detriment to selling the house at the premium that might be required. if it was to be knocked down. So those are 3 points I wanted to make, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make one quick point. I think Mr. Provenzano misread the zoning analysis on the drawings, and I just want to make it clear for the record. It's also a good example as to why some home buyers are misinformed when they purchase a house in terms of the zoning regulations. So he was referring to the building coverage, which is 2,900 square feet. The FAR for the house, which is on the record and on the drawings as well, is 4,600. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Foyce, 105 Garth Road with Friends of the Ward House. One quick note. If I remember from my days in real estate, there are a number of ways that you can list a home in MLS. And I would think that this property would have a much different listing than a normal private home. That's number one. So I think there has to be some emphasis in how it's supposed to be listed. The other thing I'm listening to, and listen, we're talking more about the economics. There's a lot of ways when we look at this, as Sal mentioned, as far as what the property is versus what it could be. And this is a private owner now who owns a piece of property. The circumstances are a little bit ambiguous as to whether it was part of a batch or not. But wait a minute, let's stop for a second. It's aesthetically a beautiful piece of property that adds to the value of the surrounding homes, and any developer should consider that in terms of the property. Okay, listen, I understand, even with my own family years ago, I know people that would try to subdivide a ham sandwich. We all know people in town like that. Listen, that's business. Okay, but let's start with the premise here economically that the business here is an historical property, a not-for-profit, a community, and a community group that wants to work with the developer to make this at least a going concern. And we have put forth at least an offer that is hardly just bake sales, and more to come. And we know it's a struggle, and we know it's work, and we are most definitely seriously from the accounting level looking at the economic implications of sustaining it, keeping it whole, and as you've pointed out, there's a lot of leniency here in what can be done, what might be done long term. So this is not about make it all perfect right now and spend every penny. No, that's not being said at all. So there's a lot of reasonableness in terms of what the actual cost is. Economic hardship, I found that very hard to believe. I'm not even going to entertain listening to that. But what I'm listening to now is an entity who's trying to redefine what it is right now. Okay, this is an historical property. This is a not-for-profit situation. Okay, and that is what it is. And it should be listed that way in the MLS because someone buying that should be made aware of that. And to not make them aware of that, that's another problem. And in real estate, that is a problem. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind. You know, what we are, we're trying to work with the developer. We're brainstorming on a lot of ideas, actively looking for major donors, actively looking for grants, talking to public officials who are also speaking to us about grants. And I would think that the developer also has to do that extensive homework too. We are. There's a lot of options there for the developer to take, and I think he should explore that. If he feels he's going to be stuck with it, all right, or if he feels he has to sell it, whatever he wants to do, he has to look at the numbers. He has to be realistic about what it's going to be versus what he wants it to be. Well, it's what it is right now. Okay? How is it valued? Again, we got to look at the aesthetic, but it's something more important here. This is an historic site. This is a very important historic site. I knew about that a long time ago, but I never realized this is an extremely important historical site. It's not to be taken for granted. And if I'm listening to the timetable correctly, this is an historical site that has protection. So that's the reality. It's something we have to look at as a community. I don't appreciate, among some of my own contemporaries, and I'm not going to get into specifics because I don't want to talk politics here, okay? But I don't appreciate among some of my own contemporaries the big lie. Oh, it's at the buildings. This is what we hear.
Oh, the building's going to fall down. Oh, just knock it down. Oh, there's no way that you're going to be able to save that house in court. I'm getting a little sick of the big lie. A lot of us are. It's not appreciated. It's not good for the community, and it's not honest. And I'm going to personally myself start calling out a few people on their big lies at some point. Okay, this is an historical property. It has been a serious historical property in this town for many years. Some of the people that are lying about what it is are involved in the historical process, and they better watch it because I am going to call them out on it. We got to stop this. So a number of people have to stop their nonsense. Not only that, I've been aware myself, going back 19 years, about some of the relationships between the developers. Listen, I've done my homework on a lot of developers in this town. I'm not going to get into the whole rigmarole, but the conflict of interest here, in terms of some of the people that may or may not be here tonight, are ridiculous. And they have to be held accountable to that. But your job right now is looking at today about the economics. We want to work with the developer. So regardless of what other people may be telling him, Greg, we want to work with you and make this work. This really would be a feel-good and aesthetically a good sales point, okay, for the Gifford Park area in terms of your homes, how this could be put together. And we are coming up with a competitive offer. So this is not an issue where we're talking about a gaping amount of lack of money that's not going to be put up. So that has to be considered. So we're not coming into this with pennies and bake sales. Let's get past that for a second. We're being very serious about that. And we've had to have some very serious meetings talking about that. And it's going to be work. We know that. But we've listened to the elected officials statewide, federally. They've told us what could be done. The county itself is planning a major historical celebration. And I forget how many years it's coming, but it's right. So this is a serious deal, and they're looking at this and the history here in terms of the Patriots, in terms of the human rights atrocities that did happen here, in terms of what did happen here, is something, it goes beyond the value of just the economics. But within the paradigm of a not-for-profit historical situation, there are things that can be done. Now listen, I've also followed, this property sort of ended up as an orphan a bit with Concordia and Iona and the Lutheran Church. And I can appreciate that that may have come about as something vague, but when you're talking about a bankruptcy proceeding, there's a lot of things that happen here. And I think in terms of the economics, all right, we need a little more reality in terms of that. Listen, I don't want to get into a lot of other details, but I think there's a lot of possibilities in terms of the value here of the property and making it feasible and economically at least not a loss that should be considered. And not just, and listen, we don't want to put a burden on the taxpayers. We're not talking about that either. None of that has been an issue. We're looking at other ways. So we hope we get that chance for a second conversation at least. All right, and again, I think we got to be very honest about, we got to be very careful about misreading what's really going on here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Anthony Laurie. I'm a lifelong resident of this community. I'd like to know if the Ward House members are going to take this over, who's going to maintain it? You heard Mr. McGovern say when it was a dormitory there, you want to live on that block? He said there was a lot of cars there. Sometimes there was a lot of noise there too. Is this going to be used as a museum? People going to come from all over at all hours of the day or night just to walk through there, find it out as a museum? If I lived in that neighborhood, I'd be on the phone like Mr. Luisi said one time when someone wanted to put a food truck down in his neighborhood. He said, I'd be on that telephone every day calling the cops. Now, if this is going to be a museum, are we going to have restricted hours when they could come in there? You're going to have traffic going through there? Are there children playing in that neighborhood? I hope, that it isn't going to be used that way. Because if it is, Mr. McGovern had pointed it out. There was a lot of cars parked there. Sometimes he said there was noise, a lot of noise also. Maybe the college students were having their parties, but is that going to happen if that becomes a museum? Where are the funds going to come from? Bake sales? There's a lot of money that are going to be needed for that, to maintain that place, renovations. And if you do have it as a museum, people are going to come through there. If you have rugs on the floor, they're going to get worn out. There's a lot to consider before you go either way. So everybody think about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I actually wanted to come up here. I'm Dick Forliano. I live in the northern section of Eastchester. I'm a town historian. This is not going to be only an historical museum. I just want to share some experiences with you. The 350th celebration. We got the three communities, Eastchester, Bronxville, and Tuckahoe, to work together. We put a coalition, Eastchester, Bronxville, and Tuckahoe, stronger together, the CARE Coalition, to help our young people. There will be times when this house could have guided tours for school children, but it could have other uses, dormitory uses like it was before. The chapel school would love to house some of their students. The People at Immaculate Conception Church, small office space, would be a great program. It would not put a negative impact on that house. And it just should stand there as a testament to this. No other area in this country suffered longer than that place. I'm not going to give you a history lesson here, but it will not be whatever is being done with this house will not disrupt that local community. It didn't before, and it won't again. And that's how it has to all be worked out with the village of Tuckahoe. And I actually had another little speech. I just wrote a letter to Alice White. Alice is not doing well. I wish Phil was still here. And in that letter, I said, what I really would like to see is for people to get together and work out what's in the best interest of our country. And I'll give you a little history lesson. I bore people to death with it, but I think of my favorite president. Well, two favorites are George Washington, who's sitting, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln said in his two inaugurals, let's appeal to the better angels of our nature. And I'm paraphrasing, in your hand, not mine, is a momentous issue of what we face. And with malice towards none, with charity towards all, we can work something out. But to say that this house, Anthony, you've gone on countless tours with me, with Phil White with me, and I so much miss Phil White, and he would get people behind the scenes. We can work something out here. It doesn't have to be where we're at each other's throats. But this, if the Ward House, which it has been there since the mid-18th century, it is a testament to the suffering and the heroism, not only of the patriots, but also the loyalists. And it's not going to be a circus with people streaming in there disrupting the neighborhood. So Anthony, I never disagreed with you before, but I strongly disagree with you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So many interesting points and comments, so we really appreciate everyone sharing. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Catania. I am a lifelong resident of Dante Avenue in Tuckahoe. Just as a point of reference, while all the discussion was going on, I did happen to go online, and I can demonstrate right here on my phone that 230 White Plains Road is listed on Zillow as off-market. So if it is for sale, it should probably be on-market, one would think. But just to the points that I wrote up while I was sitting here tonight, with all due respect to Mr. Holcomb, I do not, begrudge the fact that he wants to make a profit by any means. But if he bought this property sight unseen, as is, where is, it doesn't particularly matter if the issues that befell the property are his fault or Concordia's fault or anyone else's fault. we can probably all agree that Concordia was not the best steward of the Ward House. I imagine we would all agree with that. I know for one thing, I've been upset ever since I noticed they put up a satellite dish on the back, which was many years ago at this point. But the language in the statute is no fault of the owner, which to me reads as being, if a tree falls on the house and splits it in half, then that's no fault of the owner, not fault of the prior owner. Because again, he had the opportunity to do due diligence on the property, and it appears that he has not. And you know, if that's his fault, that is his fault. You know, he had every opportunity when he purchased it to evaluate his investment in that property, just as he did with all the other properties. I can't imagine that anyone would sell a property or a package of property saying, you can't go inside and look at it. It doesn't make sense in any realm of logic. Point number two, to reiterate the point that several have made, this was a package deal. It's been testified as such. And are we aggregating or disaggregating that package deal? Because if you can make a profit on these 3 other properties, but this one's a dog, then why does this commission have to guarantee a profit or at least a break even if in aggregate, Mr. Holcomb's making money? So I think that we should, you know, really put into numbers that we can all understand. Is this aggregated or is it disaggregated? Likewise, if he was forced to take the Ward House as part of a package deal in order to get these other 3 properties, he probably could have turned around the next day and tried to sell it, which as far as I know, that wasn't the case. It seems that the modus operandi is, let's renovate these properties and sell them for a profit. I understand that. It makes sense. But this is a different property than those other properties. Also, I'm assuming that he probably got some sort of a discount because Concordia was likely a distressed seller, being that they were in bankruptcy. So I would think that he probably could have made a profit on day one if he had tried to sell it then. Third, it's safe to say that Mr. Holcomb bought this as an investor, and I'm sure that everyone in this room has invested in something at some point. I'd love a show of hands from everybody if you've never lost on an investment. You don't count, Frank. I can tell you right now, because I looked it up while I was sitting here. I lost 4% on my investment in Meta today. I lost 2.5% on Boeing. I made 1.3% on Ford. You know, stocks are more liquid than real estate, yes. But the fact of the matter is since he's bought this property, interest rates have skyrocketed, inflation has skyrocketed, and the unfortunate impact of that, as any real property owner knows, is that decreases the value of your investment. So to turn around and say, oh, I need to be guaranteed that I'm going to make a profit on this, may not be the most realistic argument. And again, this is with no disrespect, no besmirching of your intents. It's just the nature of the risk that you take as an investor. So, you know, I don't think it's this commission's place to guarantee a profit, especially considering the other 3 properties purchased in this package deal. And fourth and finally, I know the appropriateness of this request was previously addressed. I unfortunately wasn't able to make it that evening, but I want to refer to the first rule of construction is that you measure twice and you cut once. And you can't uncut this property. Once you tear it down, it's gone. You may replicate it, you may make it look exactly identical, but it will not be what it once was. And I appreciate the fact that this commission is having this opportunity to measure twice so that we don't cut once. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Edward Powers. I live at 6 McKinley Street in Bronxville. That parcel of land happens to be both in Bronxville and Tuckahoe. And I'd like to address 2 issues that were raised. One has to do with the usage of the Ward House. I happen to have been friendly with the faculty at Concordia. As a matter of fact, the 2005 Honda Accord that I'm driving from, I bought from Professor Squires, and she lived in the Ward House. And they explained to me that that house, although quote unquote was a dormitory, was really used as a faculty residence. So you had a lot of the professors who taught at Concordia lived there. 6 McKinley is about a block, more or less, from the Ward House. And I'm driving by there, so I purchased this house that I'm in 2003. I've never seen a excess number of cars around there, nor have I heard a lot of noise or parties coming from there. From the Concordia campus, yes. From there, no. Second thing I wanted to address is, very briefly, the historical significance of the property. And I purchased the property from Elizabeth Betts Leckie, who happens to be here with us tonight. She wrote the section on the history of Gifford Park. But people may or may not be aware of that. It was owned by the Ward family, that a patriot died there. That was Captain Crawford, died right there. Well, he was bayoneted there by the Queen's Guard, and then was taken down to Kingsbridge, believe it or not, to a field hospital, and he died somewhere in the transportation. It was occupied by the British General Howe, and he was an aristocrat. He was involved in the Battle of White Plains. The forces went all the way up to Boston and down to Philadelphia. And where he resides, where he was born in England, is to this day kept as a historic site. So everything considered, this is a very important piece of property, not only to Tuckahoe, not only to Westchester, but to the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gary Bush. I am the president of the Huguenot New Rochelle Historical Association, which also privately happens to own the Thomas Paine Cottage. I have lived in Paine Heights in New Rochelle for over 40 years before I got involved with the association, and they had every fourth grader in New Rochelle come to the cottage every year to visit and to experience it. Every single day I would travel past the cottage multiple times, and it had never bothered me. I never even thought about it. None of the neighbors, we live in a pretty good neighborhood, and they were saying, there's never been, with all the events they have, anything that was regular. People coming to visit, we have people coming here and there, and we've always maintained it ourselves. We're not funded by any federal. Everything was done privately, and we had problems here and there, but for the most part, we've done very well. It's not a burden for our neighbors or anyone else. And I'm just to say that some of the things that I've heard worried about before have never been a problem, and we purchased the property in 1908. So we have a little experience, and other than a little flooding, we do pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So many good points. So many important things to consider. A couple themes kept resurfacing. I think we have a lot to consider here as a commission, and I'm grateful to everyone who has contributed to this process. It really is a thoughtful one, and one that I think deserves a sincere effort. And as we embark upon this, continue this journey, a little bit more information would be helpful. I think some good faith efforts were suggested tonight that we can pursue. I believe are being pursued. I'm optimistic, or I should say interested, to see how things progress with that. But as a commission, I think we have things to consider. And because of that, it's my inclination that we carry this over, so that we give the applicant, the owner, some time to submit the requested documentation, and we can review that and go from there. Okay. So many wonderful things.
You would want to make a motion to carry the public.
So that we do need a motion for that.
Yeah.
Okie doke.
To keep the public hearing open.
Let's do it.
Carry to the November meeting.
Shall we?
I don't think we have a date yet for November, but we'll post that.
We can post it. Another motion. Do I have a motion to keep this public hearing open for at least another month into November to be continued at our November meeting?
So moved.
I second that.
Okay, let's do it. Let's keep the conversation going. We have a lot of homework on our end too to continue reviewing submissions and are happy to do so. Yeah, okay. I think we have one more agenda item. Or is it under under discussion? Announcement.
Yes.
An announcement of an upcoming landmark nomination.
We are seeking to nominate the Generoso Pope building as a landmark. The historical significance of that building goes hand in hand with the history of Tuckahoe, as most of us in this room know. So we've already sent feelers out to the property owners, and we're still awaiting their feedback at this point in time. And of course, we could be gluttons for punishment, but that's a joke that I'm going to say for the chairperson.
But thank you. So an amazing opportunity that the commission has is to work closely with the Tuckahoe History Committee, and I would like to recognize them. They have a ton of information on all things Tuckahoe, but absolutely the Ward House and the Washington Hotel, but the Generoso Pope building, the historic village hall of Tuckahoe. An incredible amount of details, information. I'm looking, Lois, thank you. I know that you've been working with the team to gather, so thank you to everyone on the Tuckahoe History Committee for being guardians of this information. We have a lot of photos and would love to tell some of those stories. So beginning as early as next month, we could start looking at the historical, architectural, social, cultural, and economic significance of that building. But I thought it was cool. Speaking of the Generoso Pope building, who has their 2002 Tuckahoe calendar? If you don't, I think the History Committee still has a bunch, right? But if you look on, so today's October 25th, but 2 days ago, on October 23rd, in 1972, President Richard M. Nixon visits Tuckahoe, and we all know that he did a grand tour in front of the Generoso Pope building, and other kinds of history here. The Generoso Pope's certainly in here. Oh, I've heard so many people talk about that date. And right there, it happened right there. So cool. But if you look at in that same calendar, look in November, it's the Ward House. Well, this Saturday marks the 247th anniversary, fun fact, of the Battle of White Plains. This is not a joke, by the way. This is not a joke. This is a real fun fact. This Saturday is the 247th. It was 1776 anniversary of the Battle of White Plains. And a lot of events leading up to that, as we know, right here in Tuckahoe. And in this calendar lists some important dates, especially after the war, and lots of history there. Okay, thank you for that announcement. And if anyone has any information to contribute, in addition to the Tuckahoe History Committee about the Generoso Pope, please do so. We would love to receive that. For miscellaneous business, we don't have a date yet for our November meeting. We will get that up as soon as possible. So thank you again to Dr. Petronella, to everyone for tonight's discussion. So one thing that I think unites all of the discussion tonight, marble, right? We have the marble of the Washington Hotel. We have the marble of the quarries. Tuckahoe marble was discovered at the Ward House. Marble at the Generoso Pope. It's an important and valuable building material, and I think it's one that we shouldn't take for granted. That was a joke. That was a joke. That was a joke.
All right.
I think
The
that
second meeting that the joke just goes right by me.
Oh,
granite. Granite with my take
she was
it. Take it. Marbles shouldn't be taken for granite. For granite. Okay. So I think we should probably wind this down. Do we have? Unless there's anything else.
no.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Also in favor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.